They ruled the 80s pop charts.
They played an enormous concert in Rome to, I think it's something like
Sensation. From their unlikely beginnings,
nobody ever imagined he would have a single performing bone in his body.
through unbelievable onstage drama,
He had this character with what looked like genitals hanging off him.
and I think people scream.
Here's another hit. Here's another hit.
Their legacy was just showing what happens when you persevere against all odds.
Nothing to lose.
Leads you to where you are today.
I believe in storytelling.
the year was 1975. Promoting their theatrical and wildly experimental album, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway.
The band is finally gaining some commercial traction.
They've finally done this huge blockbuster album. People are raving about it.
It was their 7th album, and finally the band and frontman Peter Gabriel were beginning to see
and the lighting and bringing a lot of theatre to music.
Peter was the band. He was the front man. He was the one who...
He was such a focal point.
Everybody thought, me included at the time,
quits. It was just one of the many hurdles the band It was the fall of 1965 at the Charterhouse School in Surrey, England. The
schools, it's where you send your little boy if you want him to become a leader of men.
But not all Charterhouse students had such conventional aspirations. 15-year-old Rutherford and Peter Gabriel didn't want to rule Britannia.
Regime.
When there was a break time, there was a piano in the common room.
Because obviously at that time the Rolling Stones were always in the news, and so were the Beatles. So I think a school regarded pop music as something.
4 friends joined forces to form a prep school rock band.
Anthony Phillips was very much the guiding force behind the band getting together. He was the serious musician who...
behind a bush up the road, and he
Quite a classically, trained pianist.
and
Yet, one day, oh, he has charisma. And from then on,
1967, the Charterhouse schoolmates had started playing their first live gigs. But these early shows were hard
behind the other. Even looking around trying to see the audience.
they started playing, stop, just do something else. And they were just about to start one of the...
dissuaded. That same year, a Charterhouse alumnus turned pop star Jonathan King returned to his alma mater.
Fortune to write, compose and record his... From being a pop star himself, he also wanted to set up a record industry, like a one-man record industry. So he was in a position that he could go out and look for new talent.
The band made up a tape of their best songs. They were all too scared. So in the end, they got a friend to pass it. To do something with the band. He said later that Peter's voice just leaped out at him, that the music was okay, the what attracted him.
He offered them a recording deal with Decca Records.
Remarkable turn of events. An after-school hobby had yielded a recording contract, even if the advance was a staggeringly low £40. Now their first act as a major label band was to choose a name.
Jonathan decided, obviously they needed a name, so he called them Genesis because
Official recordings, and the excitement within the band was palpable.
They had these visions that they were going to be pop stars and around the record, but already they were starting to dream in their heads about what that sort of celebrity would be.
Stores in March 1969, but the public's response was less than enthusiastic.
It's
Upon the world to deaf ears.
The album sold about 600 copies, I think, which wasn't very successful. And I think Decca probably got a bit, had cold feet about it.
When Decca dropped them from the label, Genesis their destiny. In 1969, the boys of Genesis faced a failed debut album, no producer, and no label. The band seemed dead in the water, and they were about to confront an even bigger obstacle: college. With high school graduation approaching, the obvious choice was to put the band behind them.
How different would that have been if he'd have become a
daring decision. Despite their parents' concerns, they would defer college for a single year and gamble all they had on the band. That fall, they retreated to a remote country cottage where they would eat, sleep, and breathe nothing but music.
My parents had a cottage. It's about 30 miles south of London. Basically, it was going to be empty for the winter. Set up, and the band started rehearsing, and everybody would kind of drift down and have some breakfast, and by 10 or 11, they were writing and rehearsing.
New process for writing their music, and it yielded a distinctive new sound, far more intricate and progressive.
About Genesis is that they were all writers. People would melody, perhaps a guitar-y thing. The music that emerged was a fusion of all of this, so it was not mainstream pop at all.
They were different and very in the classical and the rock music. Now it's called prog rock. Then
that fall and winter brought a string of low-rent gigs in small clubs for little pay. Now 7 months had elapsed with no real signs of success, and time was running out. Then, one night in March of 1970, Genesis found themselves gigging in the right place at the right time, in a small London club called Ronnie Scott's.
Somehow, showtime would arrive and there would be nobody there. But Charisma Records had heard the band and was impressed.
Smith was quite a powerful personality. He was one of those people. And he went up to see them performing with Peter singing away all these bizarre songs, and he was blown away. He loved them. He thought they were terrific.
Strat, as he was called, offered Genesis a recording contract and even a modest salary, £10 a week. Remarkably, in the right direction for the band, a surprise defection.
Nobody, but there was something about playing on live on stage that just began increasingly to get to him.
So, his departure, a lot of bands would probably have folded.
Very well. We were sitting in the back of the van, and the others were very, very dispirited about it.
Deprived of their friend and collaborator, Genesis
and probably upset everybody at the time. As it turns out, with most Genesis changes over the years, it's always for the best.
Eventually, the role of lead guitar would be filled by an adventurous young musician named Steve Hackett.
Steve Hackett was a great guitarist, and he put an ad in one of the music papers basically saying who he was, what he was looking for, and Genesis responded, and it worked. Had real problems keeping a drummer. They went through 3 or 4.
Began the search for a permanent drummer by placing a help wanted ad in the music paper Melody Maker. Enter Phil Collins.
So Phil saw the advert and he knew Strat, and he knew that Genesis were with Charisma. And so he saw Strat in a bar in Soho one day, and he said, what do you think about this? You should go for it. When he came to us, he'd already done a
would go off and do normal things. They'd do their homework and then go out and, you know, go. I was upstairs trying to learn to play the drums, you know, which I did all the way through my early years.
He was rock bands. He'd done a lot of different things. He'd been a child actor, so he had this kind of inner confidence which the others lacked.
On August 24th, 1970, Genesis brought in Phil Collins.